Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going through the round 15 trade targets and preview. Finally, we're getting a lot of our Origin gun players back, and a lot of people were struggling for making numbers last week, but hopefully we shouldn't have that problem this week, which definitely does open the door, I think, for a lot of people to start making some real big moves this week in their teams, cutting out the dead weight and also trying to bring in gun players who will also cover round 17, but potentially maybe even bringing people who are Origin guns as well, who might not cover round 17. So we'll get into all of that. If you guys do appreciate the content, would really appreciate a thumbs up, and do please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as I put more videos out throughout the 2021 SuperCoach season. But let's get into the round 15 preview. So we'll just do a quick summary of the Team List Tuesday highlights. To be honest, there's not really too much I think to get into. As I mentioned from the top, that it's mainly about the Origin gun players coming back, fully rested if they missed last week, or coming back into their teams to hopefully, kickstart their team's campaigns again. So we've got the Broncos and the Rabbitohs as the first game of the round, and for the Rabbitohs, big cavalry coming back for them. Damien Cook, Cam Murray, Dan Gagai, Jai Arrow are all back in the team. For the Broncos, not an Origin gun, but they've got Tessinu playing at fullback. Jermaine Asako basically looks like he's on the outer, so anyone who's still got him in their team, he obviously looks like a great sell candidate, with Tessinu currently in favour for fullback, given that he was rushed into the team last week and actually did pretty well. For the Cowboys and the Sharks, Sisu Talakai is starting this week with the absence of Wade Graham. Definitely going to be a lot of talk around him this week, given the way that he ended last season, so we'll definitely get into a discussion around him. Teague Wilton, as a result, will fill the void on the bench for the Sharks. And the Panthers and the Roosters, again, lots of big names coming back here. For the Panthers, they're basically getting all their Origin contingent back, with Cleary, Luai, To'o, Capewell, Isaiah Yeo all returning for them. And for the Roosters, we've got James Tedesco coming back after being rested against the Titans. We've got Siosua Takeaho coming back as well into the starting lineup. And also Sam Verrills has been cleared to make a return as well this week for the Roosters, which is a big plus for them, as they've been missing kind of one of their better, hookers. And Sam Verrills should be obviously a welcome addition to the team. Some notable absentees out of the Panthers and the Roosters. For the Panthers, Paul Momorowski drops out of the side with the return of all of the gun players for Penrith, and Matt Burton does move into the left centre position again. William Kikau looks like he's picked up an injury, and so he's actually out of the team. So Liam Martin comes into the starting lineup. That definitely is bad news for any Kikau owners. I think a lot of people brought him in for the round 13 bye week, but he just hasn't quite done the business, and he's obviously looking like a great sell. Joseph Swally is out for the Roosters given the return of Tedesco, although apparently there is some late mail that Sam Walker might be getting a rest due to his sore shoulder, and that might see Swally come back into the team, as you'd expect Joey Manu to come in at 5'8", so that's definitely something to keep an eye on as well in the late mail for this round. For the Knights and the Warriors, the Knights are getting big players back in Kalen Ponga and Mitchell Pearce. Hopefully it does kickstart their campaign, because without these two, they've really not looked good at all. For the Warriors, Reece Walsh comes back from his suspension, and Sean O'Sullivan comes in the halves to replace Chanel Harris-Tavita. Big outs though for each of these teams. We've got Bradman Best out for the Knights. Looks like 6 to 8 weeks out on the sidelines with a syndesmosis injury, and Chanel Harris-Tavita has got a torn pec, and he's actually out for the rest of the season for the Warriors, so a big blow for them. Next up, we've got the Storm versus the Tigers. Christian Welch and George Jennings are big inclusions for the Storm here. Christian Welch comes back into the starting lineup after missing last week. Definitely a welcome addition to my team. He's still hanging around in my team, but he's a decent front row forward option, so I'm glad to see him back. And a big miss in this game is Adam Dewey, who, after getting that pretty bad head knock against the Eels last week, he's out this round and looks like a great sell candidate. And finally, we've got the Titans versus Sea Eagles on Sunday. Big inclusions for the Titans here, with Dave Fafita, Tina Fasumala-Awi and Moe Fotuaika are all going to be starting after coming off the bench last week, aside from Fotuaika, who was serving a one-match suspension. And for the Sea Eagles, it's their main man, Tom Trbojevic, is back in the starting lineup. In the Eels Bulldogs as well on Sunday, the big exclusion here, I guess, is Mike Acevo, who's got a suspension after that hit on Adam Dewey. And Sean Russell comes back into the He's joining the starting lineup. So yeah, Blake Ferguson looks like he's not getting a run back into the team anytime soon. So yeah, if anyone's still holding Ferguson, that's probably put the nail in the coffin, I think, for his SuperCoach prospects. So that's all I kind of wanted to really touch on, to be honest, with the Team List Tuesday highlights. I think, it's I'm recording this on Wednesday evening, and I think it's been a bit of time for people to digest that. Just wanted to give a quick wrap up on the Origin inclusions. One thing I will note, obviously, is that not this week, but next week, we've got the super trade round where we got 5 trades available. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that in terms of maybe how you would think about strategizing your trades overall for this round. I think given that you've got the full 5 next week, obviously you don't have to use all 5, but it really is a good opportunity potentially to really reshift your team, cut a lot of the bad players that you've got in your team who aren't really contributing at all, and also to be able to bring in gun players for either round 17 or also for the run home. And so the way I would just prioritize it is that you've got 2 trades this week and up to 5 next week. I think for this round you're probably going to be targeting the guys who probably got the lower break evens, who if you wait another week on them, their price might be a bit unattainable. So you probably want to be targeting those guys with lower break evens or maybe a really good matchup. If there's someone that has got a relatively higher break even, there's some uncertainty around, or the matchup's not quite as good, this is definitely falls into the category of they can be brought in next week. I think that's just, if you think about that in terms of your trades, that should help out your strategy overall in terms of deciding if there's a few players that you're looking to bring into the team in terms of how to prioritize them. So I think the first topic that we cover for this round is the gun center wings, or just the center wings in general, to be honest, because we've got a lot of players who are sitting there currently, like Dane Laurie, Dave Nofaluma, Charlie Staines, who people I think are trying to get rid of, and there's a few guys who've got really good matchups and draws coming up who do also play in round 17. So those are the center wing options I am going to be focusing on, who look very appealing, and we kind of want to sort through the mess and see which ones are the ones to stand out. So firstly, I'll just give my quick thoughts on terms of if Staines, Laurie, Nofaluma, etc. are good sells. For me, Charlie Staines is fine to sell. I'm not comfortable playing Charlie Staines in my 17, and I haven't really done so that much this season. He's made enough money, I think, to justify selling. And like me, I'm not playing in my 17, so I'm very happy to cut him loose and hopefully make a bit of money on the trade. Dane Laurie is a little bit harder, I think, to justify. Well, it's a bit harder to justify the sell, but I still do think that Laurie is a sell. He's priced at about 519k, very high break even of about 119, similar to Staines, who's on I think 106 break even. Laurie has done quite a good job so far this season. He's made a lot of cash. He's proved to be a pretty decent centering option. But I think a lot of people are looking to cut loose, given that the next 2 games for the Tigers are pretty tough in Melbourne and Rabbitohs, and then also in round 17 they've got the bye. So for the next 3-week stretch, they're not really looking that great of an option. The run home for the Tigers is very good, though. They've got a couple of matchups against the Bulldogs, and overall aren't versing too many of the top teams. So there is an argument to help hold someone like a Laurie for that period of time. But I also completely understand, you want to cash in at his peaked price and trade. So I think I'm definitely okay with Laurie as a sell. And Nofaluma, it's kind of similar to Laurie in that, Nofaluma hasn't done very well. His base numbers are actually a little bit down on last season. There were times last season where he would score a try combined with his base and tackle breaking. He was probably averaging 70 plus, whereas this season so far we're seeing in the games that he's scoring tries, he's probably only about 55 to 60. So it seems like his base and tackle breaking ability overall is about 10 points less than what it was. And he has been shifted around quite a bit in the Tigers lineup in the past few weeks, moving from sometimes on the right wing, sometimes on the left wing. He played a little bit of time even at fullback last round with Laurie going off for his HRA. I would say the return of the inclusion of Ken Mamalo to the Tigers, who I imagine will be playing on the left, will hopefully give some stability for Nofaluma, and that he just stays on the right wing, which I do think is probably the better side. Dewey obviously isn't playing this round, but when he is, he's probably going to be more of the side that you'd think that the Tigers would direct their attack to. So I think I think Nofaluma is okay more as a hold compared to Laurie. Like, I own the pair of them, and I'm probably more likely to be selling Laurie compared to a Nofaluma, because I do probably want to keep one of them for that really nice run home. But Nofaluma is also a lot cheaper. He's got a very similar break even to Laurie, and I think I probably would be able to create more money by selling Laurie. So that's just really my only justification. But I think you could toss a coin between the two of them, or even sell both of them as well. Now that we've gone kind of through justifying that we can sell these guys, who are we going to bring in for them? I think Alex Johnston goes without saying is probably the number one priority I think I'd go for in centre wing if you're interested in him. He was obviously a great trade and target last week, and he scored an amazing 124 with a hat trick. Now priced at 555, so he went up about 90k from last week. His 3-round average is 100, which is ridiculous, and his break even is in negative 71. So he's going to go up in price massively. And I think if you look at those next 5 games for the Rabbitohs, this is why everyone's jumping on Broncos, Tigers, Cowboys, Bulldogs, Warriors. Amazing matchups, and that left edge of the Rabbitohs looks really strong. Aside from Latrell and Cam Murray and Damien Cook, the Rabbitohs don't really have too many other players miss playing for Origin. Sorry, I know that those three are pretty key players in Murray, Latrell and Cook, but I don't really think that's going to detriment their left edge necessarily too much. I mean, they've still got Cody Walker running the show there, and so I think Johnson is still going to be just as good on that left side. Sorry, I guess you could throw in Dan Gagai is probably going to be missing as well, but I still think Johnston is a great trade-in target. I got him in last week by selling Tedesco actually, and that move's paid off in the short run, at least for last week, so I'm very happy to have him at the moment in my center wings. You just have to kind of be prepared for some low scores because his base stats are pretty weak. I think he averages around 18 to 20 points a week in base stats. But, with his ability to score like a double and a hat-trick basically any week, if he scores a double, he's probably going to get you like 80 to 90. If he gets a hat-trick, throw it to 120. And if he scores a try, he'll probably get you around 50 to 60. And easily in those next 5 games, you can easily see him scoring at least 1 try in each of those games. So I think Johnson is a great trade-in target. And this is probably the week to get him. Otherwise, he's probably going to be way too expensive, I think, at that point. Jesse Raymond is probably the next guy I think a lot of people are going to be looking at. We kind of discussed him last week as well. He's had some amazing base and power statistics in the past few rounds. It's his tackling, it's his runs, his offloads, and his tackle breaks. And so Raymond's averaged around 52 for the past, I think for the whole season actually. And he's also got a very, very good draw with the Sharks. Cowboys, Broncos, Warriors, Raiders, and Bulldogs in the next 5 is a really, really strong draw. He's a little bit cheaper than Johnston at 509k. He's got a break-even of 17, so he's not as much of a priority, say, trading target as Johnston if you are interested in Raymond. But that break-even is pretty low, and I would expect him to be going up in price again this week. So I do think that Raymond is also a very, very good trade-in target. I haven't quite decided, whether I will go for Raymond or not. I'm happy enough, I think, with that Sharks draw. It looks good, and Sean Johnson looks to be playing very, very well, getting back to, that really, what we saw from last season where he was really able to control the ball, and the Sharks in general, creating a lot of try assists, and I think people like Jesse Raymond are definitely going to benefit off that. So I think Raymond is also a very good trade-in target. And I think he's of a very different mold to a Johnston in that he's got a very, very good floor, probably less of the upside than, say, a Johnston, but you're getting a lot more stability out of him, which is something I really like. So I think it also could depend on the current makeup of your center wings. If you've got a lot of try-scoring wingers, maybe it's pretty safe to go for like a Raymond to lock down like a 40 to 50 minimum each week, but with a good draw could also push into the 80s and 90 scores. I will touch on his teammate now as well, Siosifa Talakai. So I mentioned, with Wade Graham out of the side, and it looks like potentially, I think the reports that I was seeing was about 4 weeks that Wade Graham was going to be out for as he manages his head knocks. That might not be true, and he might actually be back sooner. But Talakai has moved into the starting second row, and Talakai was an absolute monster in SuperCoach towards the back end of last season when he was starting and playing close to 80 minutes. I think I bought him very, very early on in the season, and I just left him in my center wing for a long time, and then I was really able to profit in the back end because he was getting close to averaging, I think it was like 73, 75 towards the back end. He was constantly pushing like 60, 70, 80 scores, and sometimes even cracking the 100-point. Because he had a very SuperCoach friendly game in that he was doing a lot of tackle breaking, a lot of offloading, and making a lot of runs. And I think we haven't quite seen that so far this season because he's been in and out of the team a little bit. I think he had some injury to begin the season, then he's come back, and then he had a suspension for, I think the crackdown was really, really strong, so he was out for another couple of weeks. So he hasn't quite gotten to a rhythm yet, which is probably the reason why we haven't seen him get to those really big scores that we saw from the back end of last season. But now at 369k, with a break-even of 80, I don't think he's quite as much of a priority as the other two guys, purely because of that break-even, and this will be the first time that we're probably seeing him starting in a while. And I will mention that Teague Wilton is also on the bench for the Sharks that might potentially eat into his minutes. So Talakai is definitely someone I'm keeping a very, very close eye on. I won't be bringing him in this week, but he'll be one of those people who I see, if he does really well this week, looks like he's playing 75 to 80 minutes or, pretty high minutes. And it looks like he's back to that real tackle breaking ability. He's 100% going to be someone I'll bring in next week in one of my 5 trades next round. That's the approach I'm going to take. I don't mind people jumping on early. I just would kind of caution that, there's potentially some risk, but, you might not be expecting those big scores from the get-go. So definitely a wait and see for one round for me, but I don't mind people jumping on straight away. Ruben Garrick is probably the next guy that we'll touch on as maybe a gun center wing who covers round 17. I mean, it's a bit different to the rest of these guys in that, he's super, super expensive, 685k, but he's playing on the left side of what's looking like a really, really attacking Manly outfit They scored 50 points without Tom Trbojevic last week against the Cowboys. He's now back in the side. And look who them Sea Eagles are versing. They've got the Titans and then the Bulldogs in their next two, which that alone is amazing. Then it's the Raiders, the Dragons, the West Tigers. Again, a fantastic draw, which is something, a pretty common theme that is, being shared across all of these round 17 center wing options. Garrick's 3-round average is ridiculous. He's averaging 96 in the last 3 rounds. And even playing at fullback last week in the absence of Tom, he looked really, really strong. He's got that goal kicking bonus, which is really what's making him a super interesting proposition, because when he's got goal kicking, even if he's not scoring any tries, Manly can score 35, 40 points. And say he gets like maybe 5 or 6 goal kicks. That's already adding 25 to 30 points potentially in just goal kicking. Combine that with his base, which is around 20 to 25. He's got a floor of around 50 to 55. That's unbelievable. And you throw in maybe another try and a line break in every other game, then that pushes his average close to that 70 to 80 that we're seeing, and even more so. If he's able to get a double, maybe some tackle breaking as well, which he was really, really good at last round. He was doing a lot of tackle breaking. So Garrick is a really, really strong proposition in my eyes, and I think it all comes down to how you view the Sea Eagles in terms of how many points are they going to be scoring in the next few rounds. Because if Manly is scoring a lot of points, Garrick is going to do really, really well. The thing that's kind of drawing me off him is just the price. 685k is so much money to be paying for him. I mean, I can afford it actually with my potential trades this round, but you don't also have to just spend the money if you can, if you could afford it, because you also have to keep in the back of your mind you might want to get sooner rather than later. Guys like Dave Fafita, Harry Grant, Ryan Pappenhausen, etc. We will have guys who can, facilitate that, like a Nico Hines, who's super, super expensive at the moment. So I think there are avenues there, but it's still something to be wary of. I think sometimes I hear quite a few people say, cash isn't an issue. We've been able to generate enough cash. I mean, not everyone's in the same boat. I probably haven't been able to generate as much cash as other people, so I'm a little bit more wary about, spending all the money if I can avoid it. But I think Garrick, if I did bite the bullet and spent all that money, he definitely would be someone I'd probably be happy to hold for the rest of the season if he's able to maintain, not even just like a 96 average. Obviously that would be amazing, but if you could maintain like a 70 to 75 average, so obviously we're talking absolute elite. So I think I'd be very, very happy with that. It's just paying a lot of money, and with a break even of 96, he might not get that this week. So he might be someone you can consider for next week in the 5 trade round if you don't want to bite the bullet and pay that much for this week. Finally, I've got Daniel Tupou. I think Daniel Tupou is going to be like one of your top 4 or 5 center wing options for the run home. I think the reason that a lot of people aren't buying him this week, though, is obviously the next 2 games are very tough. The Panthers and the Storm, which is completely understandable why people want to avoid him. But I just want to flag him that, in round 17, if you could maybe make a plan to make him, to get him in that week, you should do so, because the Bulldogs in round 17, for that alone in the bye week, is a fantastic matchup that you want him for. He obviously has fantastic base. He hasn't been able to score as highly as some of these other guys, but he's been ticking along pretty nicely with a 3-round average of 64. His break-even is also a little bit high at 85. So I think he's probably one of these guys that if you don't want to jump the gun early, definitely a good one to hold off on. Panthers and Storm, he might score a little bit lower, and you can pick him up very nice and cheap in round 17 with a nice 3-game stretch against the Bulldogs, the Cowboys, and the Knights. So that's the kind of approach I'm going to be taking with Daniel Tupou, and I think you can apply the same logic to say like even a Matt Ikuvalu or a Joseph Suwali as well, given that the next 2 games are very, very tough. But those are my kind of thoughts on the gun center wings options for round 17. I think Alex Johnson, if you're okay with that low base but really, really high upside, he's the number 1 trade and priority for me. And I think you can probably flip a coin between the other 3 in Raimi and Talakai and Garrick. I probably would rule out Talakai, and that I'd probably want to wait for next week. And so I think it comes down to whether you want to go for Raimi or Garrick, and the choice is probably up to you. So staying on course with our center wings, we'll talk about some of the cheap options. Obviously, we've got Greg Marzhew of the Titans, priced at 173k, minus 80 break even, because in the first 2 games so far of his SuperCoach career, he's got an average of 73, which is massive. And so he's the number 1 traded in player, I believe, from the last time I checked the SuperCoach website, because he's going to make a stack of cash this week. And out of these 3 guys that I've got here, he's definitely the best cash generation prospect, because he's got that really, really negative break even, and he's got a very friendly SuperCoach scoring game, in that he does a lot of runs, he's got a lot of offloading and a lot of tackle breaking, which is very conducive to a lot of SuperCoach points. The issue I have with him, though, is that he doesn't cover round 17, and I think in my eyes, now that we're getting to the towards the pointy end of the season. I know we're kind of like halfway, but in terms of the trades, I think a lot of people are probably on the pointier ends of their trades. And I think with your trades now, you probably either want to be going for round 17 players, nuffs, so guys who are not going to play at all, or guns. I think that's probably the way I would think about it. Mazu, he potentially has a capability of being a gun, but I also have some concerns maybe about his position in the team. You've got Anthony Don, I think, is sitting in the reserves for the Titans this week. I think Corey Thompson is not far away from making a return. Greg Mazu might keep his spot, and at that point in time, he's probably a very, very good center wing that you can just keep in your center wing and play on matchups. But I don't think I'm going to be going for him this week. I don't think I'll be prioritizing him. The cash, as I mentioned, cash generation is good, but I think I'd rather be preferring to go for round 17 players or just straight up guns. And so Mazu for me is going to be someone I'm going to avoid. But I think, if you've got quite a few trades held up your sleeve that you've kind of been able to save quite a few, I think you can afford to use the 2 trades on Mazu, because say if Mazu doesn't become one of these gun center wings that you can hold for the rest of the year, you're going to be trading him out again, I think, down the line. And so you obviously pocket the cash, but you're going to have to make a plan so that you can go bring in Mazu, say for like a Charlie Staines, make a couple of 100k on that, which is obviously very, very tidy. And then maybe in a few weeks, you can flip Mazu to like a gun, like a Daniel Tupou in round 17. I think if you've got the trades and you can plan for that, I think that's a great strategy to go for. But if you're someone like me who's only been able to save like 3 or 4 trades so far this season, I'm a little bit more selective about who I want to be bringing in. So for that reason, I'm probably going to be skipping Mazu. Matt Tomoko is someone I'm hoping actually gets more of an extended run, because he does qualify for that round 17 coverage, and he had a very, very good first game in SuperCoach, scoring 83 points last week. Obviously, it was against the Broncos, who do leak probably the most SuperCoach points to any other team, but it was a very positive indication. He does also have some potential rotation risk in that he was filling in for Curtis Scott, and I don't actually know what the latest situation is on that, whether I think Curtis Scott has been indefinitely stood down, but he might come back into the team. I just don't quite know yet. And you've got Jared Croker as well, who obviously, if he comes back fit, you'd expect him to slot straight back into the centers, and you might see Sebastian Kris, accommodate for Curtis Scott's centering position. So Tomoko could be a risk of also dropping out into the team, but I think I'm hopeful for that Tomoko can, hold down a spot in the center wing, and you can pick him up for the round 17 bye week. And if ultimately down the track, he does lose a spot, but he's not named in the 17, then he's not like an auto emergency nightmare, and essentially just becomes enough. Tomoko is one of these guys that I think is going to be a great next week trading target, because he's only playing his second game this week, and if he gets named again next week, he's a perfect kind of downgrade option at 203k. Even if you've still got like a Staines next week, I think that trade makes perfect sense next round to bank you some cash, and also to get him to play round 17 if he does manage to keep a spot through then. So that's why I'm not going for Mazu, and that I'm thinking potentially I might do a cheap centering downgrade to Tomoko next round. And finally, I've touched on Joseph Suaalii. So he has got his first price increase, moving up to 227k, but it's still very, very affordable for him. Suaalii, the benefit of him is that he's basically guaranteed a round 17 spot, but maybe not that many games in between. Although there is, as I mentioned at the top in the Team List Tuesday section, that there is some potentially late mail that Sam Walker might be missing for the Roosters this round through a sore shoulder, and Suaalii might come in at centres with Manu going to 5'8". If that's the case, then I think Suaalii becomes a little bit more on the radar. My initial thought, though, was him is that, if he doesn't play up until round 17, there's no reason to bring him in when you've got like a Mazu or Tomoko that you could potentially profit off and maybe even play, just as an extra number, maybe if your squad is lacking in depth. But I think Suaalii, if he does play this round, it does become interesting, because he's also got a minus 21 break even. So he would start to go up a little bit more in price, and he does lose that cheapie kind of status, I think, at that point. So that's the approach that I would take with Suaalii. I think keep an eye on the late mail. If he does somehow get named, maybe try to keep a trade up his sleeve to accommodate for that. Fortunately, the Roosters do play on Friday this week, which is kind of earlier in the round. So hopefully you haven't had to make too many other trades before that. So you should be able to get confirmation of that an hour before kickoff, and then you can make a decision as to whether to bring Suaalii. I've already got Suaalii in my team, so I don't have to fortunately make that call. But that's definitely something I'd be just thinking about as well for this round. So next up, I'll get into a little bit of a discussion around halves and 5/8 that we can also have for round 17 and also throughout the end of the season. So I've kind of already flagged here that Cody Walker is probably the number one target if you don't already have him at 5'8". All the reasons I stated for Alex Johnston and the fantastic draw for the Rabbitohs, same applies for Cody Walker. He's probably going to be one of those really, really important guys for round 17 as like a potential captain, vice captain option. So I think Cody Walker is probably the number one that you'd go for. I think what is a more interesting discussion is the other Cody Nikorima versus a Sean Johnson. So as I mentioned with Ramian, the Sharks have got a fantastic draw. Hopefully you guys can see this. I've just copied this from the NRL SuperCoach Stats website. Hopefully it's visible in terms of the matchups and also their previous scores so far this season. But as you can see there, if you look at the Sharks draw, it's really fantastic. They've got the Cowboys this week. And then up until basically round 24, the only really top team that they verse is, well, here they've got Canberra Raiders flags on, but even the Raiders haven't been that hot themselves this round. But you look at that, you've got games against the Broncos, Warriors, Bulldogs, Manly, Warriors again, Knights, Tigers, Broncos. Like, the draw is just amazing. And Shaun Johnson has already started to show in the past couple of weeks that kind of, the kind of form that he was showing for SuperCoach last season. Scores of 70, 79 and 71 in the past couple of weeks. So he's been showing very, very good signs. And he's got a 38 break even, so he's definitely in that kind of category of, if you can bring him in this week, that'd be good, because he is probably at the bottom of his price. And he's averaging very, very well over the past fortnight. Versus like a Nikorima, who's also doing very, very well. He's been obviously a lot more consistent in terms of his time on the field. Something with Shaun Johnson is that he's just come back off a very, very serious Achilles injury, whereas Nikorima from the beginning of the season has been very, very consistent in playing at the number 6 position for the Warriors. And both of these guys are goal kicking, which I should mention. So that's really why they're really coveted, I think, at the moment for a round 17 halfback or 5'8", because they're both dual listed. So with Nikorima, he's shown a little bit more volatility in his scores than, say, like a Shaun Johnson has so far. So Nikorima, at the beginning of the season, he was really like hot and cold. We had 74, 34, 134, 35, 37, then 104, 24. And then in round 8, he got 112. Since then, he's been actually very, very consistent. 95, 66, 69, 61, 73. Very, very steady, going above 60. And after that initial kind of, up and down roller coaster, he's proven to be very consistent. One thing I will mention is that, Chanel Harris-Tavita is out now for the Warriors for the rest of the season. Those 3 big scores that Nikorima's had in round 3, 6, and 8 was all when Harris-Tavita was out earlier in the season as well. So definitely that's something to factor in. I think, if you're looking for maybe more of a kind of high upside option, I think Nikorima is probably the one that you'd be going for over a Shaun Johnson, given that, he has shown this tendency to get really high scores, because with the goal kicking, he's got the ability to run, find the try line, and, the Warriors draw is also nothing to snooze at. You've got the Knights, the Dragons, Sharks, Panthers in round 18, although that round 18 is straight after Origin, so we might see a weakened Panthers side, so I wouldn't even really be considering that like their top side. Then you've got Rabbitohs, which might be tough. Then it's the Tigers, Sharks, Bulldogs, Broncos, Raiders, and Titans throughout the end of the season. I would just give the edge to the Sharks, I think, in terms of the draw, although I probably rate the Warriors as a team more than the Sharks, if that makes sense. I think I probably have a little bit more. Both these teams can be very inconsistent, especially the Warriors. They show that form probably all the time, every season. They have, on their day, the Warriors can beat anyone, which is why you're probably seeing some of those lower and higher scores for Nikorima earlier in the season. Obviously, the big difference I think between these two is also the price. Shaun Johnson is 495k, Nikorima is 582, so you're paying like 90k more for Nikorima. He's also got a higher break even of 87, but he's averaging 71 throughout the season. Very, very strong. So I think the way that I'd kind of would be differentiating between these two, it's really tough. I think I personally I would probably lean towards maybe like a Nikorima, because I really do like that high upside. I really like his consistency that he's shown over the past few weeks. Yes, he is a little bit more expensive than Johnson, but I've got more confidence in Nikorima to stay in the park. Johnson is just coming back from this Achilles injury. He is obviously playing for a contract now that he's been told by the Sharks that he's not going to be there at the beginning of next season. You might view that as a big motivator for him to have a strong end to the season. I do prefer the Sharks draw, as I mentioned, but Nikorima, I do like that high upside. I like the consistency. I like the goal kicking that he's got. Obviously, Johnson is goal kicking as well, and maybe Nikorima for me is probably looking like a next round trade in, as I've got Matt Burton at the moment, who I'm happy to keep for this week because he's got also a low break even, and hopefully Matt Burton to Nikorima next week might not cost me any money at all, and that's one thing I've been thinking about, although I could still obviously pivot to Shaun Johnson. So for me, I'm kind of wanting to wait another week and maybe just get like one more sample out of each of these two before making my decision. Maybe Johnson pops off and looks incredible and I just decide he's the one, versus Nikorima, the Warriors might look like a shambles and I'm like, no, I don't want him in my team. So honestly, I know I haven't really given a straight answer. It's really, really hard between these two. I think if budget is a really, really big concern for you, I would go with Johnson because he's a lot cheaper. I think if you're probably trying to chase really high upside, so say if you're in a lower rank or you really want to go for probably more of a point of difference, because I do feel like Johnson is going to end up with more ownership than Nikorima. then I think for that point of difference factor, I would probably lean to Nikorima, but honestly, you can flip a coin between these two. So this next little section is not really around the trade in target, but I kind of wanted to give some, some discussion around bringing in guys who play a State of Origin who will miss round 17, but are guys you're probably going to want for the rest of the season and the run home, and whether or not it's okay to bring these guys in before round 17. So I've got 5 names here that I think are very, very good, guys that are obviously amazing Supercoach options who we can potentially look at bringing in before round 17. I've got Harry Grant, Dave Fifita, Tom Trbojevic, James Tedesco, and Val Holmes. So the way that I've kind of thought about these guys is how much better are these guys in their respective positions versus all the other options. I think if I come in with that mentality, for me it makes it very, very easy to think about which of the guys that I'd be happy to jump on before round 17 versus the guys who I'm happy to wait on post Origin. So I'll start with Harry Grant. The hooker position is so tough. I highlighted that last week when I was going through the round 17 potential hooker options. There's not a lot to work off at the moment. Damien Cook is available, but he doesn't play round 17. He's got obviously got a good draw, but so far his form this season in Supercoach I have not been thrilled by. I mean, he's very, very cheap, but I think Harry Grant is the guy that you want to go for at the hooker position. Obviously, you could go for like a Brandon Smith who has shown to be very, very strong over the past month. But Grant, I think even coming off the bench, I think his lowest score is like 39, something like that. I have to double check that. But off the bench, he still is averaging, 74, and all of his scores, I think barring one off the bench, the guy can get it done even like playing 50 to 60 minutes. So for me, he's like by far and away the standout at hooker. So Grant is one of those guys who I'd be very happy to jump on even pre-round 17. The only thing I would factor in is that he is obviously coming off of quite a few injuries so far this season. He had a disrupted preparation coming into Origin 1. He missed the start of the season. That's my only concern with him, and that the Storm might be extra cautious with him and they might just choose to rest him altogether. But I also feel like they might want to be just putting a little bit of minutes into him so that by the end of the season, when they're really, really going to want him, he's not just coming off like complete restings and then he's actually been able to get some match fitness. So for that reason, I think I'm happy to go for Grant before round 17. And I think also if you've got like a Reed Marnie, maybe, I think Reed Marnie it's a bit of a harder discussion because he's also probably a keeper for the rest of the season, but he's probably not going to be available until round 18. So I think again, it's one of those situations where if you're low on trades and trying to conserve them, I would probably hold on to like a Marnie. But if you've got enough, then I think, going to a Marnie to Grant, earlier than a lot of other people, because I feel like a lot of people are not going to go for a lot of these guys before round 17. If you can get the jump on them, that really could be setting up for success. Bringing in like a gun who's like a point of difference. That's always the best way, I think, to be, gaining ranks or improving in head-to-head leagues. So Grant, 100%, I think is a good person to go for round 17, in my opinion. Fifita, I feel very, very similarly about. I think he's by far and away the best second row forward for Supercoach so far this season, averaging 94. I think next best is like Angus Crichton and Tohu Harris, so I think around 75. That's like a 20-point gap between the two of them. And with Fifita, we've already seen that the Titans will be happy to play him, even coming off State of Origin. Yes, he was coming off the bench last week, and that's probably would be the same thing in round 18 when he has to back up again. But even coming off the bench, he played 34 minutes against the Roosters, who are, red hot, and he scored 47 points, and I think he had like 9 tackle breaks. The guy just tackle breaks with fun. And so I think even in playing 50 to 60 minutes or just reduced minutes in general, he can still punch out like 50 to 60 points. So definitely Fifita, I see as one of those guys that is maybe not this round, but next round could be a perfect trade in. He's got a break even of 155 coming up against the Sea Eagles. Even if he scores 100 points this week, obviously 100 points, if you had 100 points, you'd be very, very happy with that. But he should be sub 700k by next week. And then I think he's a great trade and target for next week. You can lock him in for round 16. You'll miss round 17, but then from round 18 onwards, just hold him for the rest of the season. Very, very happy, to be purchasing him pre-round 17. Next up, I've got Tom Trbojevic. At 925k, he's super expensive. I think a lot of people would still be owning Tom because we saw him just going completely crazy as soon as he came back into the fold. Averaging 116 with a break even 152. He's one of these guys who's like, at least for myself, is very, very expensive and it would be very difficult to bring him in. But I think if you can, there's nothing wrong, I think, with bringing Tom into the team because the next fortnight for the Sea Eagles is absolutely fantastic. I think they've got the Titans and then the Bulldogs. He's going to be probably the most heavily captained player in each of those rounds. I think if you're, say, sitting near the top and maybe one of those guys who sold him, pre-Origin, I don't think there's anything wrong to bring him back into the team to kind of maybe, cover yourself off, because a lot of teams behind you will have Tom. And, if you get him into the team and you can captain him as well, obviously you can be banking potentially a lot of points, but you can also be covering, I think, the guys who are, trying to chase you as well. And, obviously that logic doesn't have to apply for everyone, because not everyone is near the top. Even if you're trying to chase, a lot of people who don't own him won't probably be looking to bring him back until post-origin. You can maybe jump the gun and bring Tom into the team. I think the difference with fullback is that at fullback, there are some other good options who are playing, say, compared to the second row forward, where like Fafita is so far and away the best. I think Tom is probably so far and away the best, but I think you can also, make do with guys like Clint Gutherson if you still own him, maybe even a Reece Walsh. I think you could take a punt on him to cover round 17 as well. So I think there are other serviceable options around fullback, which is kind of with Tom. It's a very, very difficult one. I think I would probably say he's fine to bring in before round 17. I personally, though, I'm probably going to do it afterwards, because we've already seen that Manly did rest him after the first State of Origin game. They're probably, you would think, likely to do the same in round 18. So he could miss round 17 and round 18. So obviously he could score massively the next fortnight. Then he very easily could miss the next fortnight as well. And so for me, I think that's probably the reason why I would probably not go for Tom. But I think if you want to jump the gun and maximize for the next fortnight, that's definitely something to go for. James Tedesco, I think it's a bit of a different story. I sold Tedesco last week, so that probably shows you what kind of position I have on him at the moment. I'm not saying I don't rate him as a Supercoach option. Obviously, I started with him to begin the season. I think he's fantastic. That 3-round average as well is amazing at 111. His break-even's 53, so it's probably going to continue to make cash. The reason that I sold him, though, was that last week, if he was playing against the Titans, I wouldn't have sold him. But he missed the game against the Titans in the really late mail. And then he was coming up against the Panthers, the Storm, and then he was missing round 17, and then maybe round 18 because of another rest. So for that reason, I thought those tough games mixed in with potential restings, so that's why I decided to sell. And for that reason, I don't think if you own him at the moment, I don't think you'd be looking to bring him in again until probably say round 18 if he is named that week. So with Teddy, I think it's a bit of an easier decision to hold off him, purely because the next fortnight is very, very tough compared to say a Tom who's got a fantastic next fortnight. Finally, I want to touch on Val Holmes. Val Holmes has proven to be a very, very solid centre wing option. He's probably going to be one of the top 4, I think, gun centre wings that you're going to want for the run home. I do feel like, though, we've spent so much time already so far this video talking about other good centre wing options. So I think there are plenty of others who are very serviceable, who can cover, the similar amount of points that Val Holmes might get. So for that reason, I think Holmes is probably going to be one of those guys that you would also get post-Origin. Also, do keep in mind that in round 18 and 19 after Origin, he's versing the Roosters and the Storm. Very tough games. So Val Holmes is someone I've penned in as like a round 20 pickup. So I think that's probably the reason why I would go for him post-Origin and also post those 2 tough games. He's also got a pretty high break-even of 116 at 680k. So he is quite expensive at the moment. So that's the approach that I take with Holmes. So I kind of have used these 5 as examples, but I think just taking that approach potentially of, maybe weighing up how valuable they are to that position, and maybe if you can, bridge the gap with other players, will help you in your decision if you are looking about potentially bringing in, your gun Origin players before round 17. So we'll quickly also just tackle a few other questions that I might have seen popped up so far. So Nico Hines, I think it's a big talking point whether you want to hold or sell him this week. I think the hold argument is that, he's got massive potential for a big score against the Tigers this week. He's got a break even of 171, which is huge, but we have seen him go more than 171. He's got 182, I think it is, and he's a big captaincy option. So I think that's the reason you'd probably want to hold. I think the reason to sell is obviously to bank the maximum amount of cash possible. He's basically peaked in price. Unless he is able to conjure up like a massive score this round, he's going to start losing a bit of cash. And generating that cash by selling him is going to allow you to do other upgrades this week and also next week as well, bringing in guys like a Fafita, etc. I'm leaning definitely towards the hold. I think I haven't got quite the capability or the depth in my centre wing at the moment to warrant selling him. He's definitely a strong captaincy option, I think, so far for me this week. So that's the reason why I'm going to be holding him. Even if he loses 40 to 50k, but if he scores like 130, I'll obviously be very, very happy with 130. And so I think for that reason, put simply, I'm going to hold Nico Hines. But I think there's no like right or wrong answer. I think it's completely dependent on your team. For me though, my center wings, I've got some pretty bad matchups currently at the moment. Like I've got an Ikuvalu coming up against the Panthers. I've got 2 Tigers players who are coming up against the Storm. So at the moment my center wings aren't looking the strongest. So Nico Hines though against the Tigers though is a really great matchup. So I definitely want to be holding him for that. So I'm happy to lose a bit of coin on him, but hopefully bank some big points this round. Good night to the Knights. Is it finally time that we say goodbye to those bloody Knights players, Connor Watson and Mitch Barnett really. So Mitch Barnett, he's not an ideal play in the 17, and he could be useful though for some squad depth. I think the way I'm kind of trying to view my trades as well is that if I can't really justify like a big gun upgrade for one of my other guys that I'm trading out, to say like a Dane Laurie or a Charlie Staines, I think if the guy is playing and he's doing serviceable enough, I think I'm happy to just hold him, because I think having some squad depth is really important so far this season. So many injuries and suspensions, and people getting challenged with squad depth left, right and center. I think having a Mitch Barnett who can chug along, maybe give you like 50 points a week. Hopefully the return of Pearson Ponga might spark the Knights. Obviously Barnett was profiting though when he was playing on the edge. Playing in the middle, he's less likely to get some attacking stats, but I'm hopeful for maybe just chugging along with a 50 to 55 average from him. If I can avoid it, I won't play him in the 17, but I think he can be a handy enough play, for some squad depth. And the only, the way I probably view it now, if I want to trade Barnett, it would probably be to one of these good round 17 guys like a Corey Harionara, or just upgrade him to like a Dave Fafita. Apart from that though, I'm probably happy just to keep him there in maybe not my 17, but just in the 25 somewhere. Connor Watson though, it's a bit harder as well. It really depends, I think, with Connor Watson, which position you've got him in. If Connor Watson's in your 5'8 at the moment, I think he's a great sell, because you've got so many good options. We've discussed Sean Johnson, Cody Nikorima, Cody Walker's an obvious target as well. Jerome Luai is floating around. The options at 5'8 are endless. And so I think if you've got him in there, he's very easy to sell. Unfortunately for me, I've got him at hooker. It's a bit more complicated. I think in this situation, I'm only going to want to really trade Connor Watson, I think, to like a Harry Grant, to be honest. And so I think when I choose to bring in Grant, I think that's when I'll make way for Connor Watson. At the moment, though, I'll probably just keep him, because I don't have the right dual player to switch him down to my 5'8. So that's kind of why it's a bit more of a difficult situation with Watson. I mean, as I mentioned, if he comes on off the bench, and hopefully with Pearson Ponga back in the team, he's hopefully able to, do some of his magic against some tied forwards coming on after about 20 to 30 minutes, and hopefully get some attacking stats. I'm just hoping for that. So that's kind of the reason why this week I'm not looking so hard to sell these two. I'm hopeful to see what their, the inclusion of Ponga and Pierce do to this Knights team. And then I can be able to hopefully reevaluate with a bit better view on that. And finally, another player I wanted to tackle was Carl Lawton. Is he becoming Isaiah Papali'i Part 2? We saw at the beginning of the season, Isaiah Papali'i came in, after Madison went down and got a role in the starting lineup. And then he just carried on from 400k up to the 750k guy, who's basically a gun keeper now in front row forward or second row forward. Carl Lawton, similar story here. He's on a starting edge role until Curtis Sirenen and Josh Schuster return. Although I've heard this story before, when is that going to happen? His 3-round average is 74. He's got a minus 10 break even. I think he's priced like 450k, something like that. 410k, I want to say, actually. For that, I just don't think I can bring myself to bring him in, to be honest. I mean, he's dual listed second row forward and hooker. I just don't view him as like a priority trade in for me at the moment. So I'm not going there. But I think if anyone, goes for him and he seems like he locks down a starting role, I'll be eating my words. But yeah, he's just not for me. So we'll just get into the vice captain and the captain candidates for this round. Fortunately, the captaincy is a little bit more wide open than what we've seen in previous weeks, which does make things a little bit more interesting. Vice captain, I think, though, is a bit more straightforward. You can basically just pick anyone from the Rabbitohs coming up against the Broncos. I think they're probably going to do very, very well. I've got Cody Walker, Alex Johnson, and Latrell Mitchell here. I think Latrell is probably the best vice captain candidate if you've got him in your team. Potentially someone you can bring in, if you're looking to trade out a Dane Laurie and you've got the right dual players, bring in a Laurie for a Latrell Mitchell at fullback could be an amazing point of difference play. Coming up against the Broncos, who they conceded 116 points to Bailey Simonson last week, and they're the worst team at defending fullbacks for SuperCoach purposes. Latrell is probably on for a big score here. And Cody Walker and Alex Johnson, on that devastating left edge. Broncos 10th and 3rd worst at defending the 5'8 and centre wing. So they've actually been pretty good at defending halves, but I don't really think that applies too much when they're coming up against a red-hot attack in the Rabbitohs. So I think any of these three are very, very safe. I'm probably going to be putting it either on Cody Walker or Alex Johnson, as I've got both of those in my team. I just haven't quite made the decision yet, though. Nathan Cleary against the Roosters could be a very good vice captaincy option, who I think probably won't be as highly vice captained as he normally might be, and this could give you an advantage given that normally Cleary has got such high percentages. The Roosters haven't been the best defense than what we've seen in the previous years. I mean, the Titans almost came back and beat them, scoring 34 points. So obviously the Roosters can have points put against them, and the Panthers are the best attack, you'd say. Maybe aside from the Melbourne Storm so far this season, the Roosters have been in the middle of the pack in terms of defending halfbacks. Nathan Cleary, he's only scored 54 in his last match coming up against the Bulldogs, but after being on a high from that first set of Origin win, having a bit of a break last week as well, I think Cleary could be on for maybe a good 100-point game here, and so I think he could be also a very good vice captain option if you don't want to go for or you don't own some of the Rabbitohs boys. In terms of the captaincy options, I think we're mainly looking again at the fullbacks. We've got Nicho Hynes coming up against the Tigers, as I mentioned, very, very likely to be my captain option. Tigers have been the 5th worst at defending fullbacks. Melbourne Storm have got a lot of their Origin contingent back in, Harry Grant, Cam Munster, Brandon Smith is playing excellent. Nicho Hynes, can profit off that. Coming off, he always seems to have relatively quiet weeks, and he scored an 87. The week before he scored 73, and as I mentioned before, he has got that ability to go above and beyond 171, which is his break even. So Hynes could be a great captaincy option. It might be the last week that we see Nicho Hynes as well, as Ryan Papenhuyzen is probably coming back into the Storm outfit next week. So why not just send off Nicho Hynes on a swan song and captain him for the last time? Clint Gutherson against the Bulldogs could be also a very strong captaincy consideration. Bulldogs have been the 5th worst at defending fullbacks, and Gutherson has come off a 95 and 121 in his last 2 rounds. The Bulldogs do seem to have a bit of fight about them though, so potentially they're going to be a bit more scrappy in defense than say maybe what the Tigers are going to show. Although I think Bulldogs they were good against the Dragons, but I think the Eels are a completely different proposition altogether. So I think Gutherson, the last time he played them, I think he scored 140 from what I remember. That was one of the weeks when I first brought him into the team, and so I think he could also be very good. He's done very well against his team in the past, so a great captaincy option. Dave Fifita, if you do jump the gun on him and get him in pretty early and get him in for this week against the Sea Eagles, defending on an edge, coming up against maybe a Carl Lawton, I want to say. I can't actually quite remember which side of the field he plays. Sea Eagles have been the 7th worst at defending edge back rowers, and Fifita, hopefully he's got a bit more rest in his legs and back to his tackle breaking best. Hope that was a bit of a rhyme. But yeah, so Fifita I think is a really strong point of difference captain, and definitely could set you up very well if you've got the cojones to go for there. And finally, Tom Trbojevic, I don't think too much needs to be said. He's probably going to be the most highly captained player this round in the last game of the week, coming up against the Titans, who are just leaking points for fun. 6th worst at defending fullbacks. Tom last time came off a 40-point game against the Knights. Apparently he was kind of saving himself for Origin, and he was devastating in Origin, as we saw, scoring a hat-trick. He's going to be fit and raring to go, you would imagine. So yeah, it's really scary as a non-owner not owning Tom this week, and I think if you've got him, just captain him without any fear and enjoy the points. So we'll just get into the break evens now of all the teams and all the not all the players I don't have forever. We'll just tackle some of the key ones. Out of the Broncos, to be honest, I don't think there's going to be too much interest here in a lot of their players. They don't cover round 17. They have obviously conceded a lot of points in real life, and they're not looking that good. I think really the only guys who are really considering Tavita Pangai Jr., but I think by now if you haven't got him already, you're probably looking to get him sometime soon, or you just get him post round 17. He's probably the best option to go for. I mean, you've got some guys here with negative break evens like Selwyn Cobbo, TC Rabadi, Tyson Gamble's actually got a negative break even as well. Gamble is playing in the starting lineup this week, so you could hold for one more round, but he's definitely one of those guys. I think in next week you're going to be punting and getting in like a Sean Johnson, for example. I think that's a great kind of move that you could make next week or even this week. I don't think it's a bad idea to just make the trade early, as the Sharks could do very well this week. On the higher break-even side for the Broncos, I mean, Jermaine Asako, 135, is not playing. I think he's an easy sell. Payne Haas, again, a 94 break-even at 494k. Definitely someone to keep an eye on. He could be super, super cheap come round 18, and you can pick him up really, really nice and cheap there. He hasn't really shown that kind of ceiling that we've seen out of him as one of the as the best front row forward to go for. So I don't think there's any need to rush him into the team. For the Bulldogs, I mean, Luke Thompson is probably the main guy that you would be going for, as I say every week when we come to the Bulldogs. He's got a break even here. Let me just find it. 95, so it's pretty high break even now actually. So I think you can definitely look to wait a couple of weeks on him. Hopefully he goes down a little bit more of an affordable price. I mean, Aaron Shoup here has got a negative break even of -9. The Bulldogs do cover around 17. I mean, if you want to go for a really short term cash grab, you could go for an Aaron Shoup. I'd much rather prefer to go for like a Matt Tomoko out of the Raiders, or to be honest, probably even a Greg Marzhew, even though he won't play around 17. I've just got more confidence that Marzhew would actually score more points in the games that he plays compared to an Aaron Shoup. Speaking of Tomoko and the Raiders, I mean, Tomoko's got a -37 break even, but as I mentioned, he's a great next week trade and target if he retains his position. Bailey Simons, and we may as well speak about him after that massive game last week. He's got a -13 break even at 347k. To be honest, I traded him out and I'm not looking to bring him back in. I don't want to advise bringing him back in. I mean, it's a bit of a Supercoach thing as well. Like when you trade someone out, you don't really want to bring them back in. And I think, he was coming up against the Broncos. He had a very good game. I think it's one of those cases is like, don't buy, don't sell. If you've got him in the team, just keep him. But if you haven't got, just leave him. He's a bit of an awkward price now at 347k. I'd much rather spend, the same amount of dollars essentially for a Sifa Talakai if he comes good next week. On the higher break-even side out of the Raiders, I mean, you've got Jordan Rapana, 126 break-even, 480k. He could be very cheap in the next couple of weeks, and I kind of spoke about him last week as a bit of a point of difference centre wing. Raiders draw is pretty decent coming up as well, so Rapana could be someone that you could take a punt on. CHN with a break even of 42 at 495k is still offering decent value. I think probably less so than last week when he was about 450, 460k. But I think CHN is a great round 17 playing second row forward option. Obviously last week his score was probably a bit of a down score compared to what we had seen the 3 weeks prior to that. Given he scored a try with a line break and only ended up on 56. Part of that was HIA affected, but he just didn't have that many runs that we normally see, which did give me some concern, but I still think he's an okay trade and target as well. Out of the Dragons, to be honest, I'm not looking anywhere really at the Dragons. I think they don't cover round 17. I mean, you've got Zach Lomax there, who's now in the reserves, so he might come back into the team soon. 138 break even at 442k. Yeah, he'll be one of those guys who I think I might just wait on longer and wait for him to bottom in price before picking him up. But to be honest, I'm not really looking at any of these guys. Out of the Sea Eagles, I mean, we've got Carl Lawton with a -10 break even, who we've already spoken about. Brad Parker has got a -5 break even at 414k. It's a bit of an awkward price for me for Brad Parker, and probably if I was going to go for that backline at the Sea Eagles, I'd probably, to be honest, just pay up for like a Ruben Garrick, given that he's got that goal kicking, and I've seen a few more high scores out of him more consistently than a Brad Parker. That's probably the reason I'd opt for a Garrick over a Brad Parker. You could maybe go there as a bit of a point of difference. I mean, Cherry Evans got a pretty low break even there of 1, but that's coming off that massive 148. He won't play in round 17 as well, so I'm probably not going to be going there, but he could be a nice point of difference halfback as well for the run home if you don't opt for like a Sean Johnson or a Cody Nikorima. On the higher side of things, we've got Tom Tavovic with 152 break even, but I think Tom can easily score that in his sleep. So to be honest, I don't think the break even really matters that much with him. And Marty Tapau with an 89 break even. Again, similar to Luke Thompson, you could wait a week or two, maybe bring him in next week in that 5 trade round week, and could be a good round 17 front row forward option for the run home. Out of the Storm, I think the main guys that we're really looking at are the two with the really high break evens there, Ryan Pappenhausen and Nico Hines. Nico Hines break even 171, I think, and Ryan Pappenhausen is 201. You can see the prices there relatively similar. I mean, Nico Hines is about 70k more expensive than Pappenhausen. So that's the thing. Even if Nico Hines goes down 50 to 40k next week, you can still make a profit selling Nico Hines to Ryan Pappenhausen, which is pretty crazy. But even Pappenhausen, I know a lot of people are probably going to look to do that Hines to Pappenhausen trade straight away. For me, with Pappenhausen, I'm happy to give it a week. He's got a very high break, even 201. He's coming off 7 weeks, I think it would be, until next week when he comes back from that concussion. And so we might not see him at his best that we saw at the beginning of the season. So Pappenhausen is going to be one of those guys who I'm probably not going to rush to bring in for his very first game back. I think I'll give it one game. If he scores really well, even like 100, he's going to go down massively in price. And then the Storm missed round 17 anyway, and so he'd be one of those guys who I'd be prioritizing in round 18. For the Knights, a few guys here like Kalen Ponga's back, and we obviously know what a gun he is. He'll probably play Origin though, and Ponga, I think, I don't know if he'll actually have the goal kicking when he comes back. That still might stay with Tex Hoy, or I don't even know if Tex Hoy is playing. Sorry. So Clifford. That's right. Jay Clifford might be goal kicking for the Knights with and Ponga might miss that. So that kind of loses an edge to Ponga's ceiling. And 113 break even. There's not really any rush, I think. I mean, you've got Jaden Braley with an 80 break even, so he's probably going to start going down a bit in price, which isn't ideal. Similar to Connor Watson, a 97 break even. So again, Connor Watson, if you got in 5.8, I think is looking a good sell because he's got a very high break even. And Mitch Barnett also with an 80 break even. Again, hopefully he just doesn't lose too much cash, but otherwise, as I mentioned, I'm happy to keep him as a bit of a second row forward depth. Out of the Cowboys, to be honest, the only really people I'm looking at is like a Val Holmes, and I've already given my thoughts on him as to when's a good time to bring him. Jason Tamalolo, probably the only other guy at 111 break even at 514k. Super cheap. He'll cover round 17. I just haven't seen enough out of him, to be honest, to warrant getting him in. I know he's a SuperCoach gun, but this is the way I see it. If there was like, I don't know, Joe Schmo at 514k with 111 break even, and you saw the scores that he got so far this season, you probably wouldn't be looking to bring him in. I think it's obviously just part of that appeal is that we just know his previous pedigree. But for me, Tamalolo, I'm not looking to bring him in until I see a lot more consistent and higher scoring games out of him. For the Eels, again, not too probably much to talk about here. I mean, you've got Isaiah Papali'i with a really high break even of 103, but again, one of those guys I think you're just going to hold for the remainder of the season if you've got him already, but he is nice and cheap now if you don't own him yet. Aside from that, there's not too many other options. I mean, Ryan Madison with a 60 break even at 511k, he's very cheap now, but I wouldn't be looking to bring him in if I don't have him already. There is some concern obviously about his minutes being a bit up and down the past few weeks. Bryce Cartwright has been dropped out of the 17 this round, so hopefully that means a few more minutes for Ryan Madison. I think he's one of those guys, again, don't buy, don't sell. For the Panthers here, I think we'll look towards a higher break-evens here. I mean, Charlie Staines with 109 break-even, 408k against a toughish match against the Roosters. He's definitely looking like someone I'm going to prioritize selling this round. And you've got guys like a Jerome Luai with 107 break-even. I mean, I sold Luai last week. If I had known that Schuster was going to be out for this week, I might have sold Schuster instead. But Luai, I think he's one of those guys, if you still got him in the team, I would probably hold. But I think, if he's the only one that you have to sacrifice for, like, a Cody Walker, I'd probably bite the bullet, because I think Cody Walker over the next few weeks is definitely going to outscore Luai. Oh, famous last words, but even the fact that he'll play in round 17 and Luai won't probably was enough for me to make that trade myself. Apart from that, probably not too much else I think to talk about out of the Panthers. I mean, you've got Matt Burton there with a break-even of 40. Hopefully he's able to meet that this week. If not, he should hopefully hover around that current price of 560. And he's done his job. He's made some money for me, provided some good scores. Definitely looks like someone I'll trade out probably next week for like a Cody Nikorima or a Sean Johnson. Out of the Sharks, again, we've spoken about their players quite a bit so far this video. One guy I haven't mentioned is Ronaldo Mulatalo, who could be a point of difference center wing option at 395k. He's got a minus 31 break even, so I think if you wanted to take the punt, this is a good week to do it, as he should go up quite a bit in price. And again, he'll profit from that very good draw that the Sharks have moving forward. For the Rabbitohs, to be honest, I'm not going to be speaking about too many of their players. I think everyone probably knows by now the key guys to go for. That's your Alex Johnson and your Cody Walker. For the Roosters, I mean, we've got Joseph Swiley there with a minus 20 break even. I've kind of given my thoughts on him. Joey Manu's also got a negative break even, 432k. The only kind of thoughts that I'll give on Manu is that if he plays at center wing in real life, he's not a good SuperCoach option. If you just look at his previous scores playing at center, if he plays at fullback and he plays at 5'8", he's an amazing SuperCoach option. I just don't know why the case is. If he is being named at 5'8" this week as well, if that late mail is true regarding Sam Walker, he could be a very good trade-in target then, because he'll play round 16 probably, I'd imagine, at center wing versus the Storm, which is not ideal, but he should probably still have a low break even to make money, and then in round 17 he probably will be playing fullback. So I think that's definitely an interesting point of difference as well to go for in your center wing. If he is confirmed to play at 5'8" this week, I think Manu at that point, he could be then a good option for the next few rounds. Out of the Titans, I think Mazu we've kind of given my thoughts on, and Dave Fifita as well with a 155 break even. I have given some of my thoughts on them. One person I will mention is actually Jared Wallace. He's had a couple of really strong rounds. I think the guy coming first overall actually has him as well. He scored like 91 last week and like a 70 something or an 80 something the week before, just coming out of the blue with tackle breaks, line breaks and stuff. He's got a break even of 13 at 491k. I mean, you're probably going to be looking to prioritize a round 17 front row forward, I think. But I know if you're like purely looking at head-to-head, or you've got pretty good numbers already for round 17, then Jared Wallace could be someone to go for. Out of the Warriors, now this is something I do want to mention, is Reece Walsh with a -10 break even at 532k. I'm seriously tempted by Reece Walsh this week to bring him in. I've got the right dual players to do like a Dane Laurie or a Charlie Staines to Reece Walsh. The reason being is that I really like having fullbacks in round 17 because I don't think a lot of players will be necessarily having them. I mean, Clint Gutherson obviously won't play, Turbo's not going to play, Teddy's not going to play, but I think Reece Walsh, hopefully, fingers crossed, if he doesn't get called up as a bit of a bolter for the Queensland team, he should hopefully play round 17. That really nice draw that we highlighted with Nicarima is going to apply for Walsh. And really like his scores. You know, I looked at his scores, even coming off the bench against the Eels in a tough game. He scored like 100 plus. He's shown that amazing upside. He's really, really exciting. I'm honestly seriously tempted by Reece Walsh this week, and don't be surprised if I see him in my team this week. Charlie Staines to Reece Walsh looks like a very, very good trade for me this week, and to be honest, I've kind of talked myself into it. He's got a negative break even, which is kind of why I need to make the decision this week. I feel like it's going to be a bit of a point of difference. I mean, he's obviously not one of the top tier fullbacks, but for me, I'm happy to, you know, use more trades at fullback, given that it's such a high scoring position, and I feel like I kind of need to offset like not having Tom and going for a Reece Walsh instead. He will play round 17, fingers crossed, you know, Queensland don't come knocking on his door, and that hopefully should add a pretty important number in that key buy round, and hopefully good point scoring ability. So yeah, Reece Walsh I think is potentially a good trading target this week, and I think I might be getting him myself. Apart from that, at the Warriors, I mean, you've got Kemba Marlowe. He's not actually at the Warriors anymore. He's moved to the Tigers, so ignore him in this list for now. You got Adam Fanua-Blake with a really, really big break even of 125. Could be a very, very cheap round 17 front row forward option to go for. Aside from that, Ewan Aiken has shown some decent scores in the past few weeks. Could be a point of difference in your centre wing as well, with a break even of 25 at 445k. It's a bit awkwardly priced, but again, something you could take a bit of a punt on. We also mentioned Tohu Harris as well. He's got a break even of 112, 598k. He's obviously probably going to go down quite a bit in price, but I think he's one of these guys that you can just ignore the break even because he's a season long keeper, and I think whenever you bring him in, as long as it's before round 17, he should be fine. And finally, on the Tigers, I think there's not too many options, given that this draw is pretty tough for them for the next few weeks. I mean, Adam Dewey with 157 break even, he looks like the perfect swap for a Cody Walker. They're very, very similarly priced, so I'd 100% be doing that move. Obviously depending on how many trades you've got left. I've given my thoughts already on Dave Nofaluma and Dane Laurie, with both having very, very high break evens. And apart from that, there's not too many other players I'd be interested in. I mean, Luciano Leilua might be an interesting option for round 18 onwards, given that the Tigers draw does open up from then. He's got a break even of 84 at 523k, so someone to keep an eye on potentially on your watch list maybe for the next few weeks. And Jacob Little, potentially the same thing as well. With a break even of 10 at 405k, he's shown to have quite a few good scores so far this season, and also in the past couple of weeks as well. Although he's one of those guys, I keep saying it, don't buy, don't sell. I think he's not someone I view as a season keeper. I wouldn't be looking to bring him in. I'd probably be saving my trades at hooker for like a Harry Grant or a Damien Cook, one of these top tier guys. We'll give a quick update on our overall group league. Our top scorer for round 14 was Wooden Spooners. Not really the Wooden Spooner for this week. He topped out this round with 1,299. Massive score Cameron for this week. In our overall top 5, similar names. We've got James, Paul, Jason, James, and Jackson. Well, a bunch of J's there actually. They're all in the top 400 overall, all doing very well. They keep hanging around there, so they're obviously doing very, very consistently well. And I can see that they've all had pretty decent rounds this week as well, which is the reason why they're always at the top. So guys, if you want to join the overall group league, the code is 286239. Just a bit of fun to see you guys in the overall group league. Well, that's it, guys. That is the round 15 trade targets and preview. Unfortunately, you guys can tell that my voice is starting to go. A lot of talking and the voice is going, but hopefully you guys enjoy the content, and hopefully this was insightful and valuable for you. If it was, as always, really appreciate a thumbs up on the video, and do please consider subscribing as well. I really appreciate all the support that I've seen so far from you all during this season. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next video.